We'll get to the next section, Vince. Well, let's talk about the North Carolina scoring offense against the Notre Dame scoring defense. And I want to pull up a super chat here. My guy Matt, sometimes y'all kill me sometimes. Did y'all watch them play Virginia Tech? It looks like that is the second best overall defense UNC has seen. Notre Dame being number one, they scored 10 against Virginia Tech. Okay, did you see what Notre Dame's defense did that weekend against one of the worst teams that they played? They gave up 38 points in North Carolina to Florida State. I think we can all agree that the first game of the season, after losing a 2,000-yard running backs and a 1,000-yard receiver and their number 2 receiver, focusing on the first game of the year isn't necessarily indicative of what they're going to be the entire season. This is game 8, right? Just like we can't expect Notre Dame's defense to look like it did against Florida State in the opener, right? It was replacing some guys, that kind of thing. I think there are principles that Notre Dame needs to take from that game, but you can't just say, well, Notre Dame's a better defense than Virginia Tech, therefore they should hold them to 10 or fewer points. North Carolina is a much better offense now than they were in the opener. I don't think there's any doubt about that, and that was a team that was playing their first game of the season. But at the same time, what did Virginia Tech do to win that game? They dominated the line of scrimmage on defense. That's the key. And so the principle applies, but I don't think it's so simple as just saying, well, hey, because A equals, this, B equals that, doesn't mean that those two things add up to C, right? It just doesn't quite. You see, I'm like throwing like algebra and stuff in there. I don't even understand my own references.
But there's one person in my house that understands math, and it's not me. So
yeah. So again, it just, and the other thing I'll say too is Virginia Tech, I would argue, has a little bit of a better secondary than what Notre Dame has right now because they don't have Houston Griffith.
Yeah.
I mean, excuse me, Kyle Hamilton.
Kyle Hamilton. Yeah. They've got Houston.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that has to be considered as well. I don't know if Notre Dame has the cover players right now to go out there and do some of the things that North Carolina was, or that Virginia Tech was able to do to them. So it's not quite that simple, but I do appreciate the super chat very much. And I do agree that Notre Dame is the best defense that North Carolina have played this year, but it's not by a ton. I mean, Virginia Tech has a pretty good defense, even in some of the games they've been losing recently. I don't think their defense has been necessarily the huge reason for it, and I think their defense is pretty beat up right now, but they were pretty bad against Syracuse, but they weren't the reason they lost against Pitt. They lost because they scored 7 points, so I appreciate the super chat, but Vince, this matchup is going to be very interesting. Yeah. And there's obviously the scoring over here is impressive, but North Carolina scores some points. But the thing about North Carolina is that they've had a couple games that have kind of padded their overall numbers.
Agreed.
And I think that's something to consider too. Like you look at last year, North Carolina, I'm looking at their numbers. They scored 30 points or fewer 4 times last year against 26. And then I'm looking up here. They scored fewer than 27 points. They did that twice all year. One was against Notre Dame. The other was against Boston College early in the year. This year, they've scored fewer than 27 points 3 times already.
Right.
And they lost all those games.
Yeah, the difference is they score most of their points at home. I mean,
right.
If you look at their home totals, look, they 45 against Miami, 25 against Florida State. That's the outlier, but 38 against Duke, 59 against Virginia, 59 against Georgia State. But they put their points up at home. On the road, they scored 10 against Virginia Tech.
Right.
They scored 22 against Georgia Tech. And those
are only their second road game of the season because they didn't play. No, they didn't play Georgia Tech at Georgia Tech. They played in Atlanta.
Right.
So
they played in
it was technically a road game in regards to it wasn't on their home field.
It wasn't at home.
It wasn't like on another college campus, which factors in my opinion.
You're right. Yeah.
Because on a neutral field, you're going to have a different ticket dispersion.
Good point.
So to me, that's why I say this is their second true road game of the season, and it's not a place they've played well. So I think these numbers obviously concern me. It's a matchup that concerns me. But at the same time, I think this is still a matchup. Notre Dame has some areas where we focus on some of the areas where Notre Dame doesn't match up well against Florida State. the success of this game is going to be the areas where Notre Dame matches up well against North Carolina. I said Florida State, I meant North Carolina. And one of those is obviously, I think this year you at least have one cover player that I think you can use as a weapon. That's Cam Hart. I'm curious to see how they use Cam Hart. You're not going to have Cam Hart as your Josh Downs kryptonite because of how they use Josh Downs.
Sure.
And I don't know if I want my almost 6'3" corner matched up in space against a 5'10" receiver that's shifty. But what you can do is with him, you can make sure that none of the other players are going to take all over. And so I think that's a big thing for me. I think the other part of it is okay, how can you protect Clarence Lewis in this game? That's going to be a key.
Yeah.
And when we can get into all those, but at the end of the day, I still like the fact that Notre Dame can control them along the line of scrimmage. And this right here is going to be a big part of this third down matchup. Excuse me, that's red zone. I need to go down a little bit right here. Okay,
I knew where you wanted to be.
North Carolina has been a great third down offense this year. This is one area where they're actually better than they were last year. They were on third down against Virginia Tech. They had a really rough performance, went 2 of 10. And since then, they've gone 50%, 77.8% against Virginia, 42.9% against Georgia Tech, 52.9%, 53.9%, and 46.7%. They now rank 13th in the country. And I think it's Sam Howell's running ability that is a big reason for that. Not just moving the chains on third down, but at times last year where maybe he gets sacked for a 3-yard loss or plays like that, he's now kind of making people miss and running for 5 or 6 yards, which is putting them in certain positions. And I think the fact that this year's team at receiver has a little bit more make you miss to it than last year's team. Like De'Ami Brown, their best receiver last year, was more of a traditional receiver.
Right.
This year's receiving core has a little bit more of an RPO feel to it, in my opinion. And that's something that makes them a difficult third down matchup. So Sam Howell's running ability with the make you miss kind of players in the pass game is why I think they're a good third down offense. And they're going against a Notre Dame team that this season has been a really good third down defense. Yeah.
Yep. It worries me though that the weapons that they have make them good on third down, right? I mean, that's what worries me about this, because we've seen Notre Dame lose contain on quarterbacks in the past. And we've seen them miss tackles. Like those are the two things that if I'm writing out keys to the game, like those are two pretty massive things that Notre Dame has to get under control in order to have success. And again, would they lose the game per se if they didn't do those two things? Maybe not.
They could.
But it's going to be a lot closer than it needs to be, and it's going to be a fourth quarter game when it doesn't need to be. And I don't want to be in a fourth quarter game with Sam Howell.
Against this offense, no.
Against this offense, yeah. I don't. No. That's not where I want to be if I'm Notre Dame. So you have to get those two things under control if you want to be successful in this match.
Zero concern about Keaton Slovis leading USC to a fourth quarter win last year.
Me neither.
None.
Right. Zero.
I have a lot more concern about that with Sam Howell. And this is why, ultimately, this matchup right here, the things that we're talking about, because North Carolina is going to push the tempo. They're going to get the ball out quick. They're going to really come at you. And think about when we talk about the Notre Dame offense, why does that matter? It's because, you get the defense on its heels. They have trouble adjusting. Well, that's also true for Notre Dame's defense when they're going against an RPO team and a tempo team. And so it's imperative that the Notre Dame offense come out strong, so that way if North Carolina starts off well, just like it did last year, that you can match them point for point to make sure they don't get any momentum going. Yep. Because if they get early scores and then you're not getting early scores, because I remember how last year played out. Notre Dame goes 3 and out. Ian Book scrambles around for loses like 20 yards, gets sacked. Notre Dame has to punt deep from their own territory. North Carolina, I think the first possession they got was like near midfield. And then, bam, just quick score. Notre Dame gets the ball back, answers. And then Carolina comes back, bam, quick score, big score again. And then Notre Dame answers. And all the excitement that the crowd had every time they scored, the crowd went, it wasn't a big crowd, but like the crowd got into it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And the North Carolina sideline was fired up. And then all that went away the moment that Notre Dame responded by going back down the field and scoring.
Right.
That's going to be a big part, because I do believe that if Notre Dame can just make a stop or two early. And if the Notre Dame offense can get some points on the board early, this defense will eventually adapt to what North Carolina is doing. They'll get caught up to speed and they'll be able to slow them down. The biggest fear is that you fall behind by 7, 10, 17 points, because this is not an offense you want to be playing catch up against. And that's the concern. So that's why the Notre Dame offense early has to have the defenses back. Now, if the defense comes out and plays great early, that's fine.
That's great.
But I'm not expecting that, because I know how this is why we've advocated for Notre Dame doing these things offensively for so long, because it's difficult.
Yes,
for a defense, especially early.
Yeah,
so
we talked about this yesterday, right? This is, to me, Notre Dame was able to put the Notre Dame offense was able to put the team on their back in the last game, right?
Right.
They need to be able to do that this game, and that needs to be something that the defense can count on moving forward, especially in this North Carolina game. Maybe not against some of the other teams down the road, but especially in this game, they have to count on the offense putting some points on the board to give them a chance to take a breath. The defense that they're not. The defense has been the side of the ball that has won them games. Okay, the defense needs the offense to help them out a little bit,
like it did late against Virginia Tech.
Exactly, and like they did in the USC game, and so that's what they need. I think this offense is up to the task, and therefore I think the defense is up to the task. As long as it's not all on the defense.
Right. Now right here, these three numbers, these three things right here, to me, for the defense, are going to determine success in this game, in my opinion. It's the ability to hold North Carolina to field goals, which is what red zone. Notre Dame's really, really good in their red zone defense when it comes to not allowing touchdowns.
Yeah.
Notre Dame has been a really good third down defense all season, and Notre Dame has been really good at forcing turnovers. Now, North Carolina is pretty good in a couple of those areas, but if Notre Dame can be like in this range, like, be good at forcing field goals, be good at third down stops, be good at forcing turnovers, that right there, especially in the first half, is the key to success. Because the other thing we said earlier is this isn't a team that I want to play catch up against. It's not, because they can just keep outpacing you.
Yes.
I would argue, however, that they're not a team that's necessarily built to come back incredibly well either, depending on how you defend them. Now, if you go prevent and do all that stuff like the Florida State, they'll score. But the other flip side is that when they get away, they're kind of like the opposite of Wisconsin. I've said Wisconsin's not a team that can play catch up because they just have no explosiveness. To me, when I look at North Carolina, they have a potent pass attack, but it's not a potent pass attack that scares me as much as if that's all they're doing.
Right.
What makes North Carolina so good is its balance.
You have to
now, last year, they could drop back and just beat you throwing the ball. They didn't have to, but they could. De'Ami Brown, Daz Newsome, really good group of receivers. This year, they're not that team, because if you're up 17 on them and they have to throw the ball, say, hey, look, we're doubling Josh Downs, we're going to make you beat us with somebody else, and they don't have the weapons to do that. In my opinion, it's just like USC. You have to keep Josh Downs from having the game-changing plays. I don't care what his numbers are. Don't let him have the game-changing plays. But if you get up on them, Vince, 17, 20, because, you've made some stops, you've forced turnovers, you've got them off the field on third down. When they have put drives together, you've held them to field goals. When you're doing those things against North Carolina and they lose their ability to kind of remain balanced,
right,
and you can just pin your ears back and attack that line, knowing they're going to drop back and throw, that's where Notre Dame could really pull this, turn this sucker into I think it's going to be a tightly contested game into wow, did you see what Notre Dame did in North Carolina?
Yeah.
That's how I think.
And this is one of those games too. Even though North Carolina is 3-3, there's going to be a lot of eyeballs on this game. Number one, because
4-3, real quick, 4-3.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I keep forgetting about last week. They're 4-3, but a lot of eyeballs are going to be on it. It's at night. It's against Sam Howell, who's a really, he's one of the top quarterbacks in a low quarterback class coming out. I get that, but he's still one of the top quarterbacks. If Notre Dame can make a statement here, I think that it allows Notre Dame to finally get a little bit of respect from some people, even though North Carolina's 4-3. I get it,
because they still are a media darling.
Yeah, absolutely, no question. Even though they've laid an egg 3 times, but it doesn't matter. This is an opportunity for Notre Dame to make a statement, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow when we talk about the big picture.
It has
stuff.
to be a blowout.
It has to be.
If Notre Dame wins by 7 to 10 points or less, they'll be because then all of a sudden North Carolina sucks, right? Oh, they're 4-4. Exactly. They're not that good. Their defense is terrible. Exactly. Blah blah blah. Right. If you rout them, that to me is a different story.
Agreed.
Because that's going to be the key. Is that? And I also think too is, look, this is one of the two teams that concerns me the most moving forward. Sure. Virginia being the other one.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you can get through this game with a W, it's like, okay, I feel a lot better about just continuing to roll. This is that stub your toe game that concerns me a little bit.
Yeah.
But if the defense plays up to its game, if the defense shines in these three areas, Vince, then I think it will be a fun, exciting night. Now, one thing.